All right, guys, so this is my first ever attempt at making a cash game vlog. I've only ever done tournament edits from my Twitch sessions in the past. But anyway, I went to the Hustler Casino and I played 25, 50, 100, the biggest stakes I ever played, sat down with 15K, and it actually ended up being the biggest session of my entire life. So without further ado, let's start the vlog. I showed up at the Hustler with around $45,000 in my player's account, and I sat down with $15,000 in order to play 25, 50, 100. So basically, I have about 150 big blinds or straddles, which is basically the third biggest blind, which is fairly short for these kind of cash games, but it's a manageable stack size that I think will allow me to feel more comfortable since I've spent most of my cash game time lately playing 60 NL on ACR, where you have 120 big blinds. Playing deeper would be fun, but these stakes are pretty big by my standards, so I'm out here playing a somewhat short stack and trying to make something happen. One more thing, I actually did a study session about all these hands with my guy Jordan, the founder of BBZ Poker, one of the top poker training sites who I humbly represent. You can check that study session out on my poker channel, which is linked in the description. Jordan has done a ton of coaching with me over the years, mostly on MTTs, but he's pretty proficient in cash games as well, so I got his insight into these hands before I made this video so that I would be able to offer you my thought process as well as what BBZ taught me about each hand, which is going to be much closer to GTO. That being said, Jordan wouldn't claim to be on the level of truly top tier cash game pros, and he has very limited experience playing live poker, so he and I would both love to hear your thoughts on the strategy in the comments down below. Now, let's get into these hands. I basically spent 38 minutes folding before I pick up King Queen offsuit under the gun +1, and I open it up to $300. This guy Mark to my left 3-bets to 1,000 with 7-6 suited, and it folds around to me. This is a spot where BBZ has told me that in terms of playing 60 NL on ACR, I definitely need to fold or 4-bet this hand in this spot. That being said, this is an anti-game, there's a straddle, the hands are unraked, and his 3-bet is small, so I call. The flop is Queen 6-10 with 2 clubs, giving me top pair with backdoor straight and flush opportunities. I check and Mark bets $700, which I call.
His opponent has also hit. Got to imagine this will go check, bet, call.
Thank you.
And that's exactly what happens. Pot's got 3,500 in there.
The turn is a 10 of diamonds, which I could potentially lead on, but I choose not to, and Mark neglects to continue c-betting. The river brings a backdoor flush with the deuce of diamonds, but I figured that this is a spot where I can get value from hands like jacks, queen jack, maybe pocket nines, or even ace king. Now there's still the possibility that Mark has checked back an overpair or ace queen or something on the turn due to the board pairing, but regardless, we definitely need to get value here. And because it's so plausible that we have a 10 or a backdoor flush, I don't think we're going to be encountering a lot of tricky re-raise lines here, so I lead out for 900 and I get called. He shows 7-6 suited and we take down a nice pot. BBZ's main takeaway here was that I should have bet way bigger on the river. There's just way too many hands that I can get value from here, especially given that Mark was one of the better players at the table, who is probably going to bluff catch a lot of medium strength hands here, assuming I could have all kinds of busted draws. In the next hand of note, SoFlo opens to 300 with 10-8 of hearts. Wesley 3-bets him from the big blind to 1,000, and I look down at ace-queen suited. I think that my hand is way too strong to fold, and I think flat calling doesn't seem like the move, so I 4-bet from the straddle to 3,700.
In here, 3-bet from Wesley.
Wow, are you kidding me?
700 from Steve.
Adam 22, 4-betting with the ace-queen. We are live tonight. It is Wednesday.
And I get folds, which seems like the optimal result here. The next hand occurs literally an hour and 40 minutes later. I might have missed a few small hands when I was taking notes on the session, but I don't think I so much as defended a big blind for nearly 2 hours. And I even started joking with the rest of the table about how my VPIP was going to be comedically low. I really was totally card dead though, and there might have been a hand or two I could have played, but for the most part, I was really just sitting there with absolutely nothing while these guys went crazy 3-betting each other pre-flop in every hand. Anyway, in this hand, Kennedy opens up to 700, and I look down at ace queen of diamonds and the hijack. I think about 3-betting, but instead I call. I know I can do both with this hand, and I actually got some laughs from the table when I just called because it was so fitting with my super tight image at this moment, which is probably a good argument for 3-betting. Anyway, Victor comes along in the straddle with queen 10 off, and the flop is 6-3-10 with 2 spades. My hand has completely missed, but we do have a strong ace high.
But not anymore as he hits his 10.
Check call, good play.
1200.
That being said, when Kennedy continues for 1200, I fold, especially given the player left to act. I was starting to let the live environment play games with my mind, and I actually asked BBZ if this was too tight of a fold on the flop, and he assured me that given how I played it pre-flop, it's totally fine to fold on the flop. However, pre-flop, he said that he would prefer to see me raise in a game like this where everyone is playing pretty loose pre-flop, although the flat is fine as well in solver world. Next hand, I open up pocket 8s in the hijack to 1200, given that someone had straddled to 400, and I get called by Ali G, who looks nothing like the Ali G that I was thinking of, with 6s on the button, and Kennedy in the straddle with a mystery hand that we never get to see.
We're sharing roommates cardboard. Roommates, yeah.
The flop comes ace, queen, king with 2 hearts. An amazing flop for my range, but a miserable flop for my actual hand. That being said, it's just a dynamic in which I have such a strong range advantage and that my opponents are so capped for the most part, having not 3-bet me in this situation, that I continue for 1400 into the $4,000 pot, and I get called by Kennedy. The turn is a king of spades, and I decide that this card is also really good for my range. In my head, this is what I'm thinking. And I assume that Kennedy has a weak gut shot or a second pair type hand, maybe a weak ace at most, and I barrel 3,600 into 7,000, and he folds, and he later said that he had 10-9 off. So if I did have the ability to read him and I thought he had a weak gut shot, I was correct. BBZ has informed me that he was not crazy about how I played this. Instead of betting the flop, he suggested that I check, but he said that he would be more likely to bet a hand like deuces on this flop. A small C-bet would most likely fold out all other small pocket pairs all the way up to 9s, but with 8s, you're near the top of that range, and it's not like either opponent is going to fold a hand like queen jack here. I'll admit that this is kind of counterintuitive to me because I know that if I go into check down mode that either of my opponents is just going to bet either now or on the turn, and it's going to be the worst feeling ever, calling a bet with 4th pair or just folding, knowing that they could have all kinds of bluffs. But yeah, something I definitely want to keep in mind going forward. It's better to bluff with the small pairs. In the next hand, I attempt to up my VPIP a little bit by opening queen 9 suited second act, a little bit looser than I think I'm supposed to open, but I'm trying to fit in with all these loose players and not let on just how much of a bot I am. Ali G 3-bets me to 2,000 with king of hearts, 7 of clubs, and I again deviate from solver world, and I make what I assume at the time is not a great call. To be fair though, this guy has been doing a lot of weird min 3-betting all night. The flop comes queen of diamonds, 3 of spades, 4 of clubs. He bets 1,500 into the $4,400 pot, and I make the call. The turn comes a 6 of clubs, and after I check, he bets pretty small, smaller than he probably should be betting, with a bet of $3,000 into the $7,400 pot. I still feel like we have way too much to fold, and I am suspicious about this less than half pot bet, so I make the call. The river comes the jack of spades, which is a lucky card for him if he has jacks, but besides that, it doesn't change much. I check, and he thinks about it for a second and says, I give up, and turns over his hand. Nick Airball speculates that I would have folded for a pot-sized bet, and Ali G disagreed, and to be honest, I'm really not sure. I spoke to BBZ about this hand, and he confirmed that it was fine for me to open this hand, and it's fine for me to call it a 3-bet. However, and this is probably a good thing to keep in mind, this is actually the weakest suited queen that we're going to be opening from this position pre-flop, and it's the weakest queen that we'll be defending against a 3-bet. BBZ also confirmed that he would probably call a pot-sized bet on the river. All the draws missed. You block ace-queen and king-queen. So he basically has either an overpair, a better top pair, or a bluff. He also is pretty unlikely to have a set given how low 3/5 of the board is here. So overall, it turns out that we played this hand pretty perfectly, which is very nice to know. You may have noticed that none of the hands I've played so far in the first 3 hours of playing are any good. Sure, I got ace-queen suited a couple of times, but for the most part, I've been card dead, which is acceptable to all these cash game players, I guess. But my preferred style of poker is 10 tabling tournaments on ACR on a Sunday where I get to play a fucking billion hands an hour. So this is particularly painful for me. Anyway, the 3 hours of subpar hands makes it feel extra special when I pick up aces under the gun. For a player like me who actually wants to do well and make money in these games, it can be kind of anxiety inducing when there are people straddling all the way up to $800. But then when you have aces under the gun, you think, damn, I wish 4 people had straddled this time around. The straddle is at a more reasonable 200 for this hand, however, so I raise it up to 600 under the gun +1, and I get called by the big blind, the third big blind, and then Wesley 3-bets to 3,000 from the straddle. I think about it for a while, and I choose to basically min-click it back to him, and I make it 7,000.
22 is going to bump it up. 4-bet to 7,000. Kennedy has 10s. He called a 4-bet earlier on with 5 deuce of clubs. This time he folds it. Well, he folds 10s, I would say. And Wesley deciding what he wants to do here. Wesley was the original 3-better.
Well, thank you. That make me feel much better. I was playing like the 5-10-20.
There's the call. Heads up.
He calls, and the flop comes king 4-4.
That is a really nice flop for aces. You can really size this down.
I bet small, as I would assume you are supposed to do on this board, and he thinks about it for a second and he folds. I was very unsure about the size I used when I 4-bet him from 3,000 to 7,000 pre-flop. It's so close to a min raise that I felt like it was kind of goofy looking, but if I raised any bigger, I felt like it would have committed so much of my stack that it would have put me in a weird position where I either had to go all in on the flop or something. Luckily, BBZ confirmed that this was a very good size to use pre-flop and that my flop bet size was good too. I was unsure about that flop bet as well, because if Wesley called, I would have been left with a half bet on the turn, which doesn't seem ideal to me. But BBZ said that this was fine and that he would be betting range on this flop, which I also thought was reassuring since I gave checking the flop a good amount of thought here. At this point in the stream, they put the VPIPs up on the screen, and sure enough, I've got the lowest one with 14%. Shameful. However, at this point in the stream, I'm also up $19,320 on top of my $15,000 buy-in, which is nice since with all the straddling, having a bigger stack gives us a lot more options. Next, Victor raises it up to 700 from early position, and I choose to flat the button with 7-6 of spades. Ali G bets to 3,500, and I make a tight fold, and I proceed to get roasted by the chat. BBZ later confirmed that this was a little too tight, and that given the game dynamic that he would have definitely approved of me making the call here. Next up, a hand takes place that is actually my biggest hand ever, and in fact, it's basically my biggest win ever, including tournament scores, which is pretty ridiculous. Keep in mind that this is also the biggest game that I've ever played in. In this hand, a guy named Mars limps in early position with ace-jack. Nick Airball, who is a total maniac who raises with all kinds of ridiculous hands, makes it 1,500 from the hijack with 7-5 suited, which is the kind of hand that Nick Airball absolutely doesn't mind raising with. I look down at 9s, and although the Hustler whole card system didn't pick up my hand, I decided that instead of 3-betting a loose opponent with an early position opponent who could be trapping, I would just call and take a flop. Mars comes along, and the flop was Jack of clubs, 9 of diamonds, 2 of hearts. Basically, the best flop I could ever hope for. I check, and Mars bets out 2,000 into the $4,975 pot. I think about slow playing, but I think he has a decent number of draws here, like queen 10 or king queen, that he would continue with, and then he might come along with a hand like the one that he has, ace jack, which is going to call at least a flop and turn bet, assuming I could be on a draw. So I put in a check raise to 6,600, and he makes the call. The turn comes a 7 of spades, which is not a great card, since if he has 10-8, he just made a straight. But that's only one holding, so that's not too much to be worried about. I fire $7,000 into 18,000, and Mars calls. This leaves $32,000 in the pot and 18,000 or so in each of our stacks. The river is a nasty one. It is the 8 of spades. That means that if he's been calling me down with jack 10 or pocket 10s, that he just made a straight. Still, I think it's more likely that he has a hand like top pair here. So I check, expecting him to check back.
Does he want to try to put pressure on, say, queens or kings? If he bets here, it's just a bluff, I have to imagine. He's not getting called by worse, that's for sure. Hey, chat, what do we think Adam 22 has?
Call.
There's the call.
Dun, 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 dun.
Adam with a set of 9s.
Instead, he goes all in, and honestly, I don't think about it very long before I just snap him off, and I win the biggest pot of my life. The conversation with BBZ about this hand was super interesting. First off, he said that he would have rather I 3-bet my 9s pre-flop. We have a strong hand. We know that Nick Airball could have a terrible hand, and that he's quite likely to call with a terrible hand, and we're going to knock out the limper most of the time, so there's a lot to gain from putting in a 3-bet here. Next, it's important to read into Mars' lead on the flop. It's just not a complete bluff. Given how the hand has gone so far, unless he's a total psycho, he just has to have either a good draw or a top pair type hand, which is not going to fold to the check raise. So the check raise was good. He doesn't have 7s. He has something. So given that we are at the top of our range, the check raise was good, and I picked a good hand to do it with. Next, I was a little worried that when I bet 7,000 into the 18,000 on the turn, that my size was too big, but BBC said that he would have chosen a size like this as well because the 7 does interact with the board in a significant way. So we would rather, in his words, front load the investment by putting in a big bet here and making it harder for him to continue with a hand like Jack 10, which would like to call with top pair and a gut shot before scare cards roll off like an ace, a king, or a queen. The river is the most interesting spot by far, and BBZ gave me some advice I was pretty surprised by. He said that he would have preferred a block bet on the river. Now keep in mind, we only have half pot here. He said that a lot of pretty good players in this situation would limit themselves to either checking or jamming, but that he actually prefers the small block bet, which still sounds a little crazy to me. But if you think about it, this really would have accomplished a lot. He probably would have folded or maybe called. In comparison to winning his whole stack like we did, both of those options don't seem great, but blocking would be a pretty safe option because if he had queen 10 and he jammed, we would be able to make an incredible fold, getting amazing pot odds on the call. BBZ said that he really doesn't like the check call on the river that I chose because there are just so few hands that make sense for him to jam as a bluff. He jams 10s and pretty much 10s only here. If he has bottom set, he's going to check back. If you're going to check call in this spot, you basically have to assume that he's going to be bluffing with a bunch of top pair style hands. And to be honest, I don't think bluffing with the hand that he has here makes a lot of sense. In retrospect, if I had blocked the river with a smaller bet, that would probably be a more winning play long term. Everything else kind of blows. While I'm still stacking up more chips than I've ever stacked up before, I look down at my cards and sure enough, I've got 9s again, 2 hands in a row. Mars decides that to console himself after that big loss, he will limp into the pot with ace 7 off, which I would advise him to maybe not do. But he does it, and then Victor in the hijack again opens it up to 800, which I call with my 9s in the small blind, not really paying that close of attention. Ali G 3-bets me from the third blind with ace of clubs, queen of diamonds, and everyone else folds while I make the call. The flop comes jack of diamonds, 7 of clubs, 5 of clubs. I check and Ali checks back. The turn comes the 10 of spades. He bets out for 3,000 here. I've got third pair with a gut shot, but my hand still beats most of what he gets here with. So I call, and we see a river, which is the 10 of diamonds. I check, he checks it back, and we win. A couple notes from BBZ. This is another hand where I should have raised pre-flop with the 9s. And on the river, after he called my turn bet, this 10 is actually a great card for us because it's way less likely that he has a 10 now. And at this point in the hand, it definitely doesn't seem like he has a jack or an overpair. So it looks like we have the best hand. It's not a spot where we should bet big for value since he has to call us with a pretty weak hand in order for us to get paid. So BBZ says that he prefers a block bet of 3,000 or so. And I think it honestly might have worked in this situation as well. The next hand starts off with me in the cutoff, and I look down at 10-9 of hearts. I open it up to 600, and SoFlo 3-bets me to 2,000 from the big blind. The cameras aren't picking up my hand during this hand, so you'll have to trust me. Anyway, this is a good hand to call with, so we do, and we get a flop of 7-8 deuce with 2 hearts. This is an absolutely massive flop for our hand. We have a straight flush draw with overcards, but SoFlo continues out for 1,300, and this is a big decision to make because it feels like he's strong here, and I'm weary of him re-raising me, so I call, and the turn comes a king of diamonds, and he bets 5,000.
He says he's basically saying, you're going to show any bluff, so I know you weren't bluffing. And then right after he picks up the set of jacks, he picks up aces, and Adam's not going anywhere. How strong a hand does Adam have?
I call, bringing the pot to a massive $16,975. At this point, I'm pretty confident that he's not bluffing. SoFlo actually seems like a pretty good player, but I would assume that putting in bets this big with nothing would just take a lot more mental energy than he seems to be expanding here. I'm not learned about live reads or anything like that, but I definitely feel like he has me smashed here. The river is a 7, which could potentially scare him into thinking that I made trips or something, but he isn't too scared because he then proceeds to bet $15,000. I am thankful he did so because if he had checked, I would have probably had to bluff my 10 high, and I would have got called, and it was a small loss, but it could have been a lot worse.
I flopped the ultra draw too.
There you go, 10-9 of hearts. Oh, wow.
Chose to play it slow.
Man, that could have been a huge pot.
What happens if I re-raise that flop?
Call.
You lose all your money.
Yeah, you lose all your money.
I gotta fire the turn.
I mean, if you go all in by the river, I'm gonna be thinking about it, but the flush didn't miss. So.
Yo 그냥 무거. Go ma.
10-9 of hearts.
You would have definitely got paid if you checked the river.
Blinds.
Next, I open up 7s from second position to $600, and I get 3-bet to a whopping $4,000 by Nick Airball. I basically opened for 3 big blinds, and he made it 20. I'm not used to playing against massive sizes like this, so I think about it for a while, and then I fold. At this point, I'm definitely falling victim to the I won a bunch of money and I want to lock the win up, so I'm avoiding playing expensive hands brain disease that I'm sure some of you are familiar with. I asked BBZ, and he said that he definitely would have called, so yeah, some EV loss to the maniac Nick Airball, who I believe showed 10-5 offsuit. At this point in the stream, the graphics pop up once again, showing that my VPIP has now inched up to a whopping 16%, which still means I have the lowest at the table, but it's an improvement regardless. Next, Nick Airball opens it up to 1,000 on the button, and he gets a call from both Wesley in the third blind and Kennedy in the big blind. I come along from the $200 straddle for a slightly reduced rate with King of Clubs, 10 of hearts, and we get a flop of King of Spades, 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts. Now, this would normally be a pretty great flop for me, but things quickly start to seem less good when Nick Airball blasts $3,000 into the $4,000 pot and gets check raised by Kennedy, who has top and bottom pair. I barely even think about it before folding, but this does feel a little bit tight. As it was, I was massively behind, and BBZ confirmed that this was definitely a good fold. So now, finally, on our last good hand of the night, it is straddled up to 800, so there is a total of $1,625 in the pot, and I am in the small blind with ace 10 of clubs. I opened it up to 3,425, which seemed okay to me at the time, but once I started thinking about it, I started to feel like it was too small. But I checked with BBZ, and he said it's actually a good size, so that was nice to hear. I get called by Nick Airball in the $800 straddle with ace-8 offsuit, and we go to a flop. The flop is Queen of Diamonds, 6 of Diamonds, 4 of Hearts. There is $7,650 in the pot, and when Nick checks to me, I bet $2,000. He calls pretty much instantly, which doesn't really worry me that much because my perception of Nick is that he will pretty much continue in the spot with literally any semblance of a draw. Nick is about as wide as it gets in the spot, although by calling so quickly and not even considering check raising, I think we can assume that he mostly has a weaker hand here. It's probably worth mentioning that Nick was down well over $100,000 at this point, and even though he claims that he loves to punt, I get the vibe that he wasn't in the mood to go for some crazy check raise with air. So when the turn comes, a deuce of clubs, I don't waste much time before betting $6,000 into the $11,000 pot and taking it down. BBZ's overall strategy with a maniac like Nick Airball is that I should be doing less bluffing with medium strength hands against him, which is what I was doing here more or less. This is still kind of hard for me to accept that I need to ease up and bluff less when I'm playing against players with extremely wide ranges in situations like this. Yeah, so I took the spot down, but I was just putting money into the pot with a weak hand with almost no chance to improve in a situation where I actually have the best hand. This hand and the coaching session about it, possibly more than any of the other hands tonight, makes me feel like I just have a lot to learn about this fucking game. I play a few more hands off stream before the game breaks, and I proceed to drive my ass back to my place, approximately $50,000 richer, although I also took this as an opportunity to leave all of the winnings at the casino in a player's account so that I don't have to carry that much cash for me since I am extremely paranoid about getting robbed. Overall, an extremely great night on stream. My girl and my kid have been off in Europe having a grand old time for the past week or so, so it's been nice to have more time to play poker, but I'm also kind of aware that if I have a really bad session, then I'm going to have to be extra conscious of my mind state and not getting bummed out as a result, which I know is something that every poker player deals with, and even though if I were to have lost 50 grand tonight, it wouldn't have really meant that much to me. It's definitely nice to take a W, especially after losing $14,000 on ACR over the past couple of sessions leading up to this one. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I definitely enjoyed making it. Yeah, and if you like and subscribe to this channel, if you want to stay in the loop in the future about what I got going on, I would appreciate it. And definitely subscribe to my second poker channel. The link is down in the description. Peace.